So, ever since I identified my first bird at the age of 11, I have been fascinated by migration. Many of the birds that spend the summer here in the Monadnock region spend the winter in Central or South America, but they get there under cover of darkness. Migration is largely invisible to the naked eye because so many of our birds travel at night. Broad-winged hawk is one of the exceptions to the rule. They travel only during the day, providing us a window to see into this marvelous epic that links our worlds across space and time. And so on September 6th, 2016, my fascination with migration got a bit real. I got out of bed, jumped on my bicycle, and started pedaling for South America. A couple of months before I left, biologists at Hawk Mountain in Pennsylvania had found a pair of broad-winged hawks nesting in a chestnut oak. They attached a satellite transmitter to the female of the pair. They christened her Rosalie, and then they sat back and watched her tell her story one GPS point at a time. Now, Google Maps will tell you that it's 2,100 miles from Hawk Mountain to the Panama Canal as the crow flies. But broad-winged hawks, they don't fly like crows. They don't like to cross open water, and neither does my bicycle. And so I would endeavor for the next 6 months to follow Rosalie's trail of breadcrumbs for as long as my time and money and health would allow. About the size of a crow, broad-winged hawks breed east of the Mississippi from the Canadian border south to the Gulf. They're a common bird here in the Monadnock region, where they spend their summers pretty much on their own, with the exception of a mate. They're here from May to September. But every fall, with the approach of winter, which shuts off their food supply, they head south along the Appalachians to the Gulf. Now, I like to think of them as the Prius of the bird world. They don't like to waste energy on flapping flight. They prefer to catch thermals. It's the reason they don't like to cross the Gulf. It's a major obstacle for birds that don't like to flap. I kind of think of them like a hitchhiker, except they're one of the world's greatest hitchhikers, and it's this behavior that causes them to crowd onto thermals creating these great flocks, which we call kettles, which can be many hundred strong. And so for a brief 2-week window in mid-September, New Hampshire's broad-winged hawks stream south. The count in New Hampshire can reach 10,000 birds or more. And they stream down the Appalachians until they hit the Gulf Coast, and then they head west towards Texas. And I like the imagery of driving from Keene to New York City along the interstate. And as we drive south, feeder roads direct more traffic onto the road. And it's the same with these birds. So 10,000 in New Hampshire, by the time they get to Corpus Christi in Texas, the count can reach 500,000 birds. By the time they reach Veracruz, another 700 miles down the Mexican Gulf Coast, the count can reach 1.5 million birds. Together with all of the other hawks and vultures that breed across the North American continent, approximately 4 million birds, pushed west by the Gulf and pushed east by the Mexican Altiplano, are funneled through Veracruz, where biologists sitting on the roof of the Hotel Bienvenido just north of Veracruz count them as they pass by. It's one of the great natural wonders of the world, and it's one that's available to us right here at the PAC Monadnock Raptor Observatory just east of Peterborough. One need only witness one of PAC's big days where anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 birds may pass overhead to become enchanted with this incredible spectacle. It's a gateway drug to birds, birding, and a conservation mindset born of an appreciation for these wonderful creatures. Quite a few people told me that it was too dangerous to follow the broad-winged hawk by bicycle from New Hampshire to South America. Their concern was couched in euphemisms like midlife crisis, or somewhat less euphemistically, you're going to get yourself stabbed. People were even less sensitive when talking to my wife. A taxi driver, helpfully, I think he was trying to helpfully tell her that I was going to get my throat slit on my journey. For my part, I tried to filter out all of the noise and just focus on the reality. And the reality was I had a sheet of paper with 2 columns, pro and con. The con column was fairly abundant. I had a full-time job at the Harris Center where I managed the portfolio of conservation easements. I didn't have the money to do this trip. And at 30-odd pounds overweight, I was feeling just about the right amount of aches and pains for someone about to turn 50. And I hadn't cycled a bike in 20 years. I had one lonely note in the pro column. It felt like a calling, and that was all that mattered to me. A rusting hulk lay forlorn in my garage to remind me of abandoned promises. A bike trip from Ireland to South Africa, planned but never executed in 1994. I wasn't sure I could do this trip, but I felt certain that I had to try. And any risk to self, in a weird way, kind of felt appropriate, because whatever dangers awaited me, these trips are far more perilous for the birds. Hawk Mountain had stopped putting satellite transmitters on on young broad-winged hawks because too many of them were dying, getting shot, getting hit by a car, starving, drowning, whatnot. At $5,000 per transmitter, they had become an unreliable courier. I rated my chances a little bit more highly, but nevertheless, my wife insisted that I take a satellite transmitter with me. She tagged me. The transmitter would relay my location so she could keep track of me, and there was 3 buttons on the transmitter, each with a pre-programmed email. The first button would send the email, "I've reached my location, I'm okay." The second button would send an email, "I'm stranded, I can't make my location tonight, but don't worry." And she knew that meant, I couldn't change these emails, and she knew that meant that I had a puncture, a breakdown, or whatnot, but she did not need to worry. The third button was a big red button, and it was covered with a shield so I couldn't press it accidentally. I don't know what message this button sent because I didn't program it. It was programmed by a rapid response team that were camped out in a bunker in Utah, I think. But the reality is I never had to press that button. But if the hawks had a similar technology, every second bird would press that button. That's how many of them don't make it. But the trip did force me to ask for help, and that was difficult for me because I've lived my life pretty much on a go-it-alone approach. But I had this sheet of paper with 2 columns, con and pro, and the con column had all these obstacles, and if I didn't approach them, if I didn't confront them, I wasn't going to make it. And so I asked for help. I asked my employer, and they were very generous. They gave me a 6-month sabbatical. I asked friends to help me crowdfund the project. I asked Hawk Mountain to be my scientific advisor, and everybody said yes. But trust and faith come slowly, at least to me. And I guess I was being forced to ask for help beyond my comfort zone. I was born Roman Catholic in Ireland, but my spiritual life had long since withered to a superstitious desire to attend Mass twice a year, Christmas and Easter. And so on December 24th at 10 p.m., I found myself standing outside a church in Matías Romero, about to go to midnight Mass. Matías Romero is a dusty town in Oaxaca state in southern Mexico. I had taken a taxi to church because I'd been attacked by a bunch of dogs earlier in the day, and then after that I'd been followed by a shady character. I just had a bad feeling about the town. And so I decided to take a taxi. After church concluded, I was leaving, and the taxi driver had agreed to come collect me, but I had to call him first. And so I took my phone out to call the driver, and my battery died. And so there I was, stranded, with no means to call for help, and my phone was my GPS. It was how I was going to find my way from A to B. And the church was about to close its doors. It was close to midnight, so I didn't know what to do. So I went back into the church. I knelt down in the sacristy to pray, to ask anyone who would listen to help me navigate the next 8 hours of darkness in a strange town that I didn't know. And there I was staring straight ahead at the statue of the Virgin Mary, and behind her feet was an electrical outlet. Now, I'd been in Mexico for a month at this stage, and let me tell you, at least publicly available electrical outlets are a rarity. And here was one in my hour of need. I was stunned. And so I unplugged Mary's lights for a couple of minutes. And I charged my phone, called the taxi driver, and I thanked my higher power. I continued south, biking through the highlands of Guatemala, all the time trying to follow Rosalie's digital footprint, past the Mayan ruins at Copan in northern Honduras, past the incredible volcanoes in Lake Nicaragua, and all the time I was aware that I was following a path every bit as real as the Appalachian Trail that I had followed about 3 or 4 months previously. It was a trail forged by the ebb and flow of millions of hawks across the millennia, like Rosalie and her kin. To this point of the trip, 6 months in, my world had been dominated by one word: south, south, always south. And so as I cycled into Panama on March 4th, I was cycling south along Panamanian Route 11, and I was minded, I don't know what prompted me to look skywards, but I looked skywards and I saw a sight that brought tears to my eyes. I saw a stream of migrant hawks, but they were heading north. I hadn't thought of that word in I don't know how long. I've always thought of migration as the heartbeat of the planet, and here I was at that moment that the tide turned. I felt very fortunate. After 6 months after 6 months of trading a 9-to-5 routine for a life measured in miles, food, and shelter, I crossed the Panama Canal on March 14th, and I flew home a few days later. The last day of the trip, in a strange twist, was really the only day of 6 months that I was in the Hawks domain. I was flying home to Boston. But as soon as I stepped on the plane, in truth, I felt like I was leaving the Hawks world and re-entering mine, because I chose the bicycle to go at the pace of the planet, to go at the pace of the birds, and because I wanted to accomplish the trip in a way that would honor their migration. They have the feathers on their back and nothing else, and I had my bicycle and little else. So I arrived home in Ireland, but I had this gnawing itch that I needed to scratch. As I was cycling through Houston on November 18th, I had the good fortune to take a tandem hang gliding flight to 3,000 feet. Now, as many of you know, hang gliders, they don't have engines. They gas up on the sun's energy. If they find lift in the form of a thermal, they stay up, and if they don't, they land. And so, perhaps with rekindled faith, I picked up the phone and scratched the itch, and I think my higher power has been working all along, because I live an hour from one of only 2 hang gliding schools in the northeastern US. So I put down my money, took some lessons, and a year and a half later, I'm flying with the Hawks, a qualified pilot. I think I'm being called to fly south again, and this time flying will be in the pro column. Thank you very much.